Hello then, and welcome to another episode of the Wellbeing Matters podcast with me, Gareth Boot, and
me, Sue Cowlishaw.
I don't know,
You forget your own name.
I did forget my own name. I was just a bit concerned. It sounded a bit loud. Anywho, this is episode 24 of the podcast. In this one, we're going to talk about the subject that at the moment is on everybody's lips, everybody's news feed, and anything you tend to look at on the media, which is coronavirus. Or what's it called? COVID-19. So I think this is an important podcast because for two reasons. One is it will mark what we're thinking about around it at this moment in time, which is we're into the third week of lockdown in the UK. And it'd be interesting to look back at this podcast. I'll listen back to it in a few months' time, just see how it's changed from this point.
I don't think we realise even now what historic times we are actually living through.
Do we ever?
No, but there's been nothing like this since the Spanish flu, which was nearly 100 years ago.
I was trying to think of events in my life that have had this kind of impact, and the only thing that comes close to it, there's two events that I think struck a nation. One was when the Falklands War was happening.
Yeah,
I would have been I was about 12.
I must have been about 20 then.
I can't remember exactly what it was, but I know I was young anyway. And the other one was the death of Princess Diana.
Mm.
Because although we've had other things in the world that's happened, we've had 9/11, we've had a number of wars, they never felt like they'd really directly affected us.
No.
They always felt like there was a level of distance between us and the event. And as tragic as all those events were, it didn't really kind of come to our shores. But the Falklands did. There were people, we all knew people that went and fought in the Falklands. And when Diana died, the kind of outpouring of grief in the country was something that I remember very vividly, even now. So this is the first time, probably since World War II, when we've had the kind of country that hasn't just been kind of gripped by the fear of what happened in the Falklands or the emotional outpouring around Diana. But this is something that's affecting our daily life. And it's affecting the daily life of everybody. And
it's affecting a lot of people in a very negative way. As catching the virus, there's a lot of fear around it. It seemed to be just at first, it was older people, not that they are unimportant, but now it seems to be affecting quite indiscriminately, which I think has caused a bit more fear.
Well, I've brought some notes, and we don't normally do this because I'm aware sometimes our podcast can be a little bit jovial and funny, and I hope there's some humour comes out of this in some ways, but how can you deal with a difficult subject without it, in a comical way? I think that can sometimes be inappropriate. So I've made some notes because I think there's a number of things that I thought we could do today on this podcast. The main thing was, how do we approach this challenge we're facing with maybe some practical ideas? I don't think we need to scare everybody into how serious it is. I think we're all recognising how serious this is. So it's
just little things like we live opposite quite a big hospital. And on Sunday when I was gardening, I was just aware of a lot more ambulances coming and going. But apart from that, when you look outside, the sun's shining, it's springtime. We're coming up to an Easter weekend, which will be interesting. For most of us, apart from the lockdown, there's not been a huge negative impact, or certainly I feel that way.
Well, I think we need to explore this, and the reason I think we need to explore it is, I think there's this. If you go back, so I suppose we should really start at the beginning. So for us, if you think about it, the first time coronavirus became in the news was about February, because I remember we'd gone to Edinburgh. We had a trip to Edinburgh, and we noticed when we were there, we kept kind of, almost in a joking fashion, looking at kind of tourists wearing masks. And kind of, because that's not untypical if you think about it.
No.
And they tend to generally be
people from
China.
China. Yeah,
and
they
Japan
do
and places like that.
Seem to wear masks. I noticed them once in a gambling casino in Vegas that they were wearing masks in there, and that was a long time ago. Mask.
And if you think about it, we saw it up there, and probably at that time it was big in China.
Yeah, I think they reported theirs on the 31st of January. We went away at the end of February, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, we went through back
But up
end of
until then,
February.
it was like,
It was nothing.
it's a Chinese, it's in China, it's a long way away. There are, they seem to have a lot of infections and that kind of thing, viruses. So it wasn't massively important to us at the time.
And I think even when we went into February and we came back the early part of March, again, it was becoming clear that this was becoming more serious in China, in Wuhan. Is it Wuhan? Wuhan?
Wuhan.
And it then started to emerge in other places in Europe, because I remember in February my daughter Helen, she was going to Venice, and Venice were very concerned about the coronavirus. And it was then starting to kind of move from China, and it was starting to appear in Europe.
Which was getting a little bit closer.
Yeah, but we still had the English Channel between us. That's what I kept thinking.
We did.
I wrote a blog about this morning, actually, and it was interesting how I wrote. What I said was, this for me was like, at one point, was like something that happens in China. That happens not infrequently. We do hear of things happening in China and that part of the world, but it always feels very distant. And then when it moved to Europe, it does start to feel more close to home, but you still got the English Channel between you.
And then we had a couple of tourists in York.
In York, we're very close to us.
But they kind of seemed to be just not a one-off, a two-off. And they were tourists, so we
made the assumption, they'd come on holiday and they'd been caught they'd brought the virus with them. But then all of a sudden it started to take this massively huge surge forward in London.
I think as well, Italy seemed to have a bad time very quickly before any of the other European countries.
Well, Helen went to Venice in February. And then I believe, well, I'm saying I believe, I should know exactly, but in March, she also went to Paris. And at that point, it was starting to get a little bit kind of nervy in Paris. Paris weren't very happy at all. So I suppose we went from this thing in February, which started to hear about it. The start of March, it was spreading into Europe. And then by mid-March, it was rife in our country. And I think the one thing about this whole coronavirus outbreak for me is the speed at which it's happened. The speed at which the change from being a couple of cases in York and then nothing, then London a few cases, into it being something which has become kind of huge as far as numbers are concerned.
We got onto the lockdown fairly quickly after we'd seen what had happened in other countries. We didn't wait much longer. I mean, we had our Prime Minister asked nicely that we didn't go out, and within a few days told us we weren't going out.
Look, people don't take these things seriously, and they never do.
Even now.
Well, I think it's becoming, I have to say, and I don't want to sound unkind here, but I know the way of putting it, it seems to be at times a certain class of people that are behaving in this manner. We'll talk more about this as we go on, because what I kind of wanted to do was that everybody knows this story, that we're just talking about things people already know. And whereas I think it's important that we put some context onto this from our perspective, which is when we first heard about it, when it first started to affect us, I think what's more important now is that we have to recognise the media that's put out there at the moment seems to be a two sides to this story. One that people are talking about it being really, really, really bad. And then other people that are talking about it being, it's not so bad. There's a lot of information coming out saying that maybe this is not as bad as people make it out. There's some conspiracy theories coming out, for goodness sake, about this has been done by governments to control the people. And, with any news, you've all got to take it always with a bit of pinch of salt, no matter where it comes from. But the realities are now, we are, as a country, the UK, as a nation, and the wider spread community, the global community, facing changes to our lives none of us have experienced unless we lived through World War II. And I wanted to come from an angle today, from us personally, as how it has affected us, how it's affected our thinking, and from a wellbeing perspective, how can we maybe explore and then maybe give people some ideas of things they could do. I mean, away from the obvious things, wash your hands, social distance, that's everywhere. But I think there's an opportunity for us as Better 24/7 to share some of our expertise around maybe other areas of wellbeing that are going to be affected by this, that maybe aren't so apparent straight away. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's where
We're
we're
just
coming.
looking a bit blank. Yes.
No, but that's where we're coming from with this today, because you're sat in. You've not been out of the house. You sat here in some socks. Now you can't see the socks if you're listening to the podcast, but if you're on YouTube, can you give them a little wiggle there? What's this? It's grass. You got grass on.
Because I went and looked at the garden with my
It was
socks
the garden.
on. Because my feet got so cold.
It's cold today. I mean, it's sunny outside, but this office we're recording, it's quite cool down here, and always is, which is great come summertime, because it's kind of an oasis of coolness to come into. But when it's still in the middle of winterish, springy weather, is your nose cold?
Yeah.
Mine's cold
Like
too.
a little ice cube.
So that's the angle we're coming on today. I'm sure anybody listening to this is more than aware of what's happening, reading the news. And on a point with that, just before we go into stuff, I have heard some people saying, I'm not looking at the news, it depresses me.
That's me.
Right, okay, well, I'm sorry to say this, but my kind of view on that is you have to stay informed.
The reason I don't, in general, listen to news and read newspapers ever is because it's not that I'm burying my head in the sand, it's just I like to keep myself upbeat. I am quite sensitive and I can quickly be dragged down by things like that. So when it first all happened, I did avoid it. I'm not avoiding it now because I feel more resilient in taking that kind of news on board. But I stand and I have a lot of friends who've messaged me who suffer from anxiety. It's really not helping them at all. So they are best to probably keep away.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about, because I've kind of split down. Wellbeing covers a lot of things. We know that. We talk about this in this podcast a lot. Our wellbeing covers pretty much every aspect of life. I thought in this one I would like to keep it to things that are really practical around two things, really, which is your mental and your physical health. We could also start to look at another element of this, which is financial health. So I want to keep to those things at the moment.
Fire away.
Fire away. If you think about where we are, and again, we're making some assumptions to who's listening to this. I do know we have listeners all around the world, so I can't pass comment for what this must be like for you guys in America, especially if you're listening in New York. I understand that place is battered at the moment. I mean, that is having a really torrid time. And other parts of the world, I'm not sure. We're only going to share our experiences of what's happening here in the UK as far as we can say we've experienced. And again, the UK is a fairly big place as well. So we're talking about the north of England. So again, if you're listening to this in the UK and you're in London, this might be different for you. But there's no doubt that people are going to be affected physically and mentally by this, some more than others. So I think that the first place to start is mental. Let's look at the mental side of this. What can we do as people to look after our mental well-being through COVID-19? Because I think of all the things that have happened, the chances of you catching COVID-19 physically yourself is quite small.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. And if you do catch it, it's clear there are some very difficult days ahead of you if you don't take well to it. If you're of a certain age, it can be very, very bad for you. But I think the idea of us catching COVID-19 is still such a small percentage for the majority of us. But mentally, I think everybody will be affected by this.
Definitely.
So it's funny you mentioned that, because you talked about sensitivity. I'd made a little list, and like I said, I'm not big into doing lists for podcasts. I want them to flow, but I think it's important we go through these points. The one thing I started to think about was how something like this, being on lockdown, affects people who are lonely anyway. So prior to the lockdown, they were lonely. Yeah. But then the lockdown comes, and that loneliness is to some degree magnified. I was thinking about times when I can say I felt lonely in my life, and it's not been very often. But when I did feel lonely, the one thing that I used to like to do to feel less lonely would be to go out into other places. I would go to things like shopping centres, or I would go to places where people were supermarkets, shopping centres. That's been taken away from people now. So for me, this has got the potential for anybody who does have a challenge with feeling lonely and loneliness. This is a chance to magnify that. So what's your kind of thoughts on that around the loneliness aspect?
I do think you can still be lonely and be surrounded by people.
Well, you can be lonely in a crowd, can't you? That's
you
the
can
saying.
be lonely in a crowd.
I'm drinking tea today, by the way, in case anybody's looking. This is Earl Grey.
With lemon, I saw.
With a bit of lemon. What have you had? You've already drunk it.
coffee with oat milk.
Anyway, back to loneliness.
I have suffered from loneliness, but not very often. And this is a difficult question for me because I am really happy with my own company. And I have a mother who's like that as well, which is just as well at the moment. So I don't really feel any different. We were talking about this. I had a week or so at the beginning, and it was because I lost my work really quickly being a yoga teacher. It went, the first class went and the last class went within about a week.
Don't go too far into that because that comes up in another point very shortly. Just stick with the loneliness.
So I felt a little bit disconnected at that time because what I did for a living was my hobby. It was my pastime. It was what I enjoyed. It wasn't just about teaching. It was about seeing people on a regular basis, people that I'd got quite fond of. And all of a sudden, they disappeared. But they hadn't, because they were on Facebook and we were Zooming and we were messaging. So that is a difficult question for me, loneliness, because it's not something that I suffer from. I quite like. Lonely, I know, is different from being alone. It's something that doesn't really bother me that much. You might be
I wanted to just really get your idea of, if somebody was suffering from loneliness, what you would suggest. It's not. I don't think any of this is about, have you had this or suffered from this, but firstly, can you be empathetic with people that are lonely, and if people are struggling with that element of loneliness or that loneliness thing right now in this COVID-19 situation, what can they do now to alleviate that now and in the future? Because the important thing about what I think we're going through now is these are not lessons that we're going to learn for just COVID-19. We're learning lessons about ourselves that we will be able to take into life after.
So do you
COVID-19.
think that people suffering from loneliness now during this situation didn't suffer from it before?
I think they might have. It will magnify those that do. People will start to feel lonelier.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do have a friend who comes to a class and she does suffer from loneliness. She does live alone and she likes to go out and about because she is quite a sociable person. And as I say, she does live alone, so her going to classes, taking her dog out, which she still does, chatting to people and connecting was very important. I also, as you know, have another friend who does suffer from loneliness, and he was quite anxious about being isolated in a flat. And that's another thing. We're lucky we have a garden. A lot of people have gardens. We can get out and walk. People that live in apartments who probably are not as mobile as we are may feel, we have a nice little old man that lives near us. He used to be off all over the place, getting on the bus, getting on the train, going to markets, this, that and the other. And all of a sudden, that's not happening for him. So as far as navigating it, keeping those connections going on an online presence, or we do chat to our neighbours over the fence, a little bit more of a distance between us now. I'm sure that most people could find some neighbour or some friend. But what's interesting, when we've been out for a run on a morning, people say good morning and smile. How are you doing? Thank you for, thanks when you move out of the way. There does seem to be, even though we're social distancing, it seems to be there's more of a connection.
Well, like I said right at the beginning of this is something that's affecting the whole country, and there is an element of this feeling we're in it together. And I think when we are going through difficult times, and it almost reminds me in a strange way of Christmas time, how there's that kind of sense of everyone's a bit kinder to each other around Christmas. Yeah. And it feels like that. You wouldn't ordinarily say and do things the rest of the year that you would do around Christmas time. Hello, how are you? Smile. Everybody seems to be upbeat and happier. And I think where at Christmas time we can be united by that joyful feeling and that joyful time of year, I think with this, we're united by this common we're all this together. This is our fight, and these words have been used quite a lot by the government. This is a fight. We're on a war footing, and I think we have got to be tempering this a little bit. I think there's an element that I think is true. We need to be very vigilant. We are fighting a virus, so I think people have got more of an ability now to just say, "Yeah, how are you doing?"
Yeah, and I was just thinking that our National Health Service asked for volunteers, and I have quite a few of my LinkedIn colleagues that have lost their jobs and have gone to volunteer. So I think getting involved in the community, providing you're fit and well and you look after yourself, that would be a great thing to do, and that would be an opportunity. And I know people say, oh yeah, the government's getting you to go and volunteer and not paying you. That could be looked upon as an opportunity for you to feel like you're doing something, which you are, and to create friendships and camaraderie. Is that the right word?
Camaraderie.
So there are some opportunities for people who do suffer from loneliness to look at what they can do, and sometimes there's no harm in sitting and being quiet, and a lot of stuff's come out for me in the past week or so once I gave myself time and realised that I didn't have to get up at the crack of dawn and fit in 1,000,001 things in a day, to use that time for reflection, I suppose. But so if somebody said to me they were lonely, I would suggest that they may, in this period, as I say, providing you're fit and well and you're not vulnerable, to take part in this coming together, really, is what I've seen. And this appreciation for people who are quite often overlooked.
Well, if you think about, we talk about this, about how, and I know you're specifically talking there about the health service, the frontline workers, the people that work in shops. There's been these big swing recently how people are saying those so-called influencers online, have got less influence than they thought. Now, when the people we're really revering and respecting right now are the key workers and the people at the front end. And I think that's true. And I think we also, as well as appreciating the frontline workers, I think we also have to appreciate that this loneliness is something that we don't talk about enough in our country. It's one of those, because if it doesn't affect you, you think, you don't see loneliness. It's like, to some degree, a bit like the coronavirus. You can't see somebody's got coronavirus unless they're coughing and splutting and think, hang on, that's not good. But as a rule, this is the difficult thing about this challenge we face as a world, is that we don't know who's got it. It's not like you have a big red spot on your head,
saying I am lonely,
and there's no red spot for coronavirus. So I think, and we'll use this word quite a bit in the podcast here, the word magnify. I think what these difficult times do is magnify where we have our challenges to face.
But if loneliness really is the feeling that comes from being less valued or feeling that you don't have a purpose, there will be some opportunities for you to turn that around.
Absolutely, there will, and I think it's good. I think that's a good bit of advice there. You've got to. If you feel you've got a purpose, then you don't feel lonely. Does that work? I think sometimes what you have to do is you have to accept that you are feeling a certain way. You can't deny if you are feeling lonely and then denying you're feeling lonely or trying to ignore the fact you're lonely. Like any problem, only makes it get worse. I think we have got the opportunity now to utilise online tools to connect with people, but that doesn't solve the problem if you were lonely before this.
No.
Because if you were lonely before it, you didn't have anybody to connect to then. So now you had no one to connect to physically, now you've got no one to connect to online, which is again why I think it's going to amplify this loneliness. And I think that idea of taking it away from you and being, I'm lonely, saying, okay, well, I'm lonely, which means I've not got a lot of people in my life. How can I add my presence to something else, and how can I assist in something is a wonderful thing.
Well, it takes it away from you being focusing on how bad you feel. Somebody always says if you feel bad, go and do something good for somebody else. And then again, we are talking about there are a lot of people that will be isolated that will not be fit and well enough to do that kind of thing.
But again, these are problems that these are problems that we've always had. We've always had a problem of loneliness. Like we've always had a problem of people not following the rules, which has applied in this coronavirus. And we're going to talk about that in a few seconds. But I think what's interesting for me is it's going to amplify loneliness. So the first thing to remember is loneliness, in many cases, it can be a state of mind. Are you lonely or are you alone? What's the difference? And I think it doesn't come down to whether you've got people around you or not around you. It does come down to the fact, do I feel valued?
Yeah, do I have
Primarily,
a purpose?
do I feel valued by myself? So if you are starting to feel that thing of I'm on my own, I'm lonely, ask that question, why don't you value yourself? What are you doing and what are you giving to the world? I mean, I'm laughing because what also has come out through this for me is how people now, everybody's an expert. Everybody's an expert. And we like listen to somebody, like Tina on Facebook tells us something, and that gets shared 1,000 times. You get some doctor say something that's qualified and got all the science behind it, and nobody wants to listen to that. So I think the interesting thing now is, because this idea of the loneliness idea comes from, I don't feel valued. You think, well, what do I give out? What can I do? What is my purpose? And you've got to make one. And if you haven't got one, it's as simple as that. There's no woo-woo
I think you
stuff
also
behind
have
this.
to ask, as unpalatable as it is what part am I playing in
You
me
should
being
always
lonely?
ask. That's a wonderful question. You should always ask that question. What part do I play in this?
Because I used to have this like sad feeling sometimes, like, oh, I don't have many friends. Then I used to think, hang on a minute, what do you actually do to cultivate friendships? Not a lot, really.
Well, it's interesting because the one thing that has happened for me, which has been quite surprising, is I've had more phone calls in the last 2 weeks with people that I know, that I have some connection with either online or something. So these were online connections that have become people ringing up, how are you doing? And I've liked that. So I think even if you feel yourself, what could I do? There must be somebody you can pick the phone up to. Even if the phone isn't answered or they haven't got time to speak to you, just put the first action in there. And I think there are now more and more community-based and good projects out there that you can get involved in as somebody who's lonely. When this is all over, there's no excuse to find something you can't invest your time in to help somebody else worse off than you. So I think it's going to magnify loneliness. The other thing mentally I think it's going to bring out is it's going to magnify again people that stress and worry anyway. Catastrophic thinking is going to be, it's rife. And I kind of almost know of the people I know who will be having this kind of thinking. I already know. Because all it's going to do is it's going to again amplify and magnify how you are without the challenge of coronavirus. So catastrophic thinking, that might show itself as, I'm going to catch coronavirus.
I'm going to die a horrible death.
I'm going to catch coronavirus. I know I'm only in my 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever it may be, but I'm going to catch it and I'm going to die. Or I'm going to catch and give it to my kids and my kids will die. Or I'm going to catch it, I'm going to give it to my mum and she'll die. And there's this catastrophic thinking and a lot of stress around that. So I think that people are going to feel stressed just because of coronavirus. Let's not take into account the fact that the majority of people financially will be affected by this, especially if you're in business.
Definitely, and all that stress is doing nothing to strengthen your immune system. It lowers your immunity, which leaves you more susceptible to catching anything really that's out there.
I just thought about this idea of if somebody, again, the coronavirus comes, it's a pressure cooker situation and you start to feel stressed and anxious. Let's look at ways to deal with stress and anxiety. Because again, once coronavirus goes away, some of the stress might go away, but if you're susceptible to stress, it's only a matter of time before it rears its head again. So let's look at some practical ways that people can handle stress. Well, I would have thought. You're so sad there looking at me.
I'm going to share one thing that's helped my stress and anxiety. Probably a bit unpalatable, and I don't expect everybody to do it. But stopping drinking alcohol really has made a difference over time. My anxiety used to flare up, and this would have been a prime example for me. This would have affected me massively in the past. And I am putting it down to the stopping drinking. I really am. And I know that if I still had been drinking, bear in mind, I'm not saying that I sat and drank all the time. Being at home, I would have drank. I would come 5 o'clock, come 6 o'clock, making dinner, drink a bit out. I'd probably be drinking a bottle of Prosecco quite often. So that's made a big difference to me. And it's easy to reach for these short-term crutches that do make you feel better for a very small amount of time. But getting into something like drinking a little bit more on a regular basis is just not the best idea. It should be avoided at all costs.
What I tend to find, and this is true, if you are stressed about something and you go to something that involves activity, so, and I'm not talking, this doesn't have to be physical activity, but it tends to be something. So let's say you're doing something which might be quite extreme. It's like I always think about Lewis Hamilton, the race car driver. I'm not sure you can spend a lot of time being stressed when you're driving a car at 250 mile an hour. When you're on a kind of a thrill seeker ride, there's not a lot of stress while you're on it because we don't have chance to think too much. It's our mind being overactive is what causes stress and worry. So when you are out of a scenario or you're doing something else, you're busy, you tend to forget a lot about your worries. Which is why I think people they can sometimes stress when they are going to work or coming home from work. But when you're doing a job, if you're doing something, it's very difficult to stress and do something at the same time.
Yeah.
Because now people are going to be stuck at home, which is generally the place most people stress out, it's going to amplify this. And people are going to reach for a drink because they don't need to go out. They can't drive anywhere. They're off work. They'll drink in the afternoon. Alcohol has got a massive role to play in you feeling pissed off and fed up and stressed more than you will ever know.
And you just have to see the panic buying at the times we've had the panic
Well,
buying.
I told you
apart
this.
from
I
toilet rolls,
I went
bread.
into Sainsbury's, Sue, and there was no pasta, there was no tinned gear, there were no toilet rolls. Obviously, that they'd gone first. And then I went down this aisle and I thought they've taken all the water. Why would you take all the water? I thought there's no chance the taps are going to get turned off. And then I looked up and to the left-hand side of where I was another aisle, and above it said water. Oh, hang on, I'm in the wrong aisle. What am I in? And it was in the beer aisle. And every single can of alcohol related to beer and lager had gone out of Sainsbury's because they're stocking up. So I think you've recognised this, and I'm glad you recognised it because this is something that I was always aware of with you. You had an element of kind of upbeatness about yourself until you went through that period probably 2 years ago now where you started to drink a little bit more. You weren't an alcoholic. I would have known if you had alcoholic tendencies. I would look for them and I would have assisted you with that. And there's no big deal and it's no problem if people have them and you're listening to this. But recognise this. The spiral is, I don't feel good, I'm stressed, I have a drink. For a very short period of time, you will feel better because it'll lift your spirit for a small period of time. It gives you a false sense of feeling good. But then the hit and coming down will be deeper and it'll be harder.
And over time, it builds up without you realising.
Oh, it builds up, no doubt. So I think you're right. For you, that's something that you've done to alleviate your stress. For me, I think having this extra time, rather than using it to worry, use it to be constructive. And I know everybody's saying this and it sounds like, yeah, that's really easy. It's not. I'm a big believer in writing your troubles down. Write down what it is that you're worried about. If you're stressed out right now, whatever it is, because you might be scared somebody in your family's going to catch coronavirus. You might be scared you're going to catch it. You might be scared about the current financial situation or your business. Write down what your worries are and share them with somebody else. But don't share it with somebody that you live with, right? I'll tell you this, right? Because the majority of husbands and wives or partners or whoever the setup is, there's a number of those relationships which will challenge you. It's like you will challenge me with something. You always come back with something pretty good and say, well, maybe you should think about this, maybe you should think about that. A lot of relationships they can buy into your bullshit, is what I'm saying. Mm. So don't be telling it to somebody who's going to say, oh, I agree, yeah, it's terrible. You want to share it with somebody, because if you write it down or share it with somebody, so writing it down for me is like sharing it with somebody. You've wrote it down. When you read it back, it can sometimes sound really silly. Or if you look at the challenge you've just written down, and instead of looking at it as your challenge or something that you're going through, what would you advise somebody to do about that? You distract yourself really from you worrying about it. I have to say, throughout this period of lockdown and the week before, I'd started to do a little bit of this. I started to look at where I was going and what I was doing. And a lot of what I needed to do to move forward was practical. And I like practicality in some ways. And the idea that this could be resolved, once you write something down and you start to put together some kind of plan around it, it then starts to take the worry and the fretting away. Because most catastrophic thinking is just unrealistic. It's not. You're blowing it back, what people say, you're blowing it out of all proportion. And the reality is when you're in it and you're thinking and you're stressed, that doesn't help you.
No, because you know what you're doing and you can't get out of it.
But avoid getting into this kind of just sat in one place in your house. I know we have limited amounts of opportunities to change our environment, but even within a house, you can move to different rooms. You can take yourself somewhere else to have some quiet time to think.
And at the moment, we can still go out. And I've spoken to people who, instead of sat on the M62 in the car on a morning for 45 minutes, they're going out for a walk instead. The weather's beautiful, it's springtime, we go out early, we very rarely see anybody. If we go at our normal time, if we go a bit later, we see a few dog walkers, a couple of cyclists. Get outside, even if you don't want to.
Okay, right. This is the truth. Most of the people who weren't doing this shit before they started ain't going to do it now. And this is a massive missed opportunity if you don't take it. We're going to talk about this again a bit further on. I mean, I think the stress and the worry, it will highlight this again if you've got catastrophic thinking, because there's a lot of stuff going around. Sue's advice would be don't look at the news. I would actually give you another idea around this. Is maybe you should read the news, but read the right news. Pick one. I tend to pick the BBC News, and I always like to ensure that any information I'm taking in is to some degree being fact-checked.
Yeah, if I read something that I think, oh, that's a bit scary, I will research.
You've got to research.
And researching and finding out factual information gives you a lot more structure, and it alleviates a lot of guesswork or things that you're imagining, because you do get into perspective. So do a bit of research, read up about things, don't just take every little bit of news you hear on the BBC or in the newspaper as complete truth.
And do it properly, because the one thing you'll find, if you get your information from a reputable source, there will not just be the details of the problem that we're facing. There's always the details of the solution to get out of it. Always. So no matter how bad the news is that you're facing in anything in life, there's always a solution out of that. There's always an end to everything. Nothing continues forever. So if you start to look at this, instead of just reading the first bit which says, we've got a chance of dying of corona and this will happen and that, then look at the other side of it. Well, what can you do to stop that, to protect yourself again from that? What happens if you do get it? Because I saw something last night by J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
And she said she'd had the symptoms of coronavirus, and she had found great use of a video that was online by a doctor explaining how to breathe.
We did it last night.
We did. And the one thing to remember is if you have issues breathing, we tend to lay on his back because we feel tired. If you lay on your front, because the majority of air goes into your back, and when you lay on your back, it constricts your breathing, so lay on your front. So again, do some research. Again, it might just be me on this, but it's something I found, because I was susceptible to worry in certain aspects of my life. I found that learning about the information as to the facts of it and then the solution always helped me. Because as long as I know there's a potential solution, that gives me hope. And really, hope's all we need. And there's nothing that I've seen that tells me that this is a situation that is completely dire. It's very difficult for some people, and it will be difficult for a lot of people, but there's a way out of it, there's a solution. For instance, now, the simple solution is, oh no, I might catch coronavirus. Well, then don't leave the house. If you don't leave the house ever, you ain't going to catch it. Yeah, but what if it comes in on a delivery? What if somebody, so you've got to bring it into some context. You can take the best available advice, utilise it to ensure that you will overcome this challenge in a more than successful way. So stress and worry, it's going to magnify that. The other thing that it's going to test, if you like, I want to say magnify. What I'm going to magnify this, it's going to test it for you, is patience. And this bit of the podcast is particularly aimed at people who might be experiencing either spending a large amount of time with their partner, their husband, their wife, their significant other, or with their kids, or a combination of all of that.
At least we don't have that.
Well, no, but we have always, as a couple, spent a large amount of time together. Since we've been together now, 6, 7 years?
Yeah.
Is it 8 years? I don't know how long it is. It's a long time. Feels longer than I'm sure it is. But we have spent a disproportionately large amount of time with each other in the periods from 2013 or 14, whatever it was. So we're kind of used to it. But and I think this is why we're more than qualified to discuss some of the things you need to do. So remember, this is something you're going to face. The only other time that's similar to this, where you tend to get all your family, your close ones, together in one room for a period of time, or one space for a period of time, is Christmas or a holiday. And we've only got to look back historically to know what nightmares they can become. You know, 2-week holiday away with your family, and you're spending time with them, can be very stressful. And the time over Christmas is very stressful. This is like that. The difference is there ain't nobody where to go. At Christmas, you can have visitors that breaks that up. This doesn't. It's going to test your patience. So let's look at that. Let's look for ways to deal with that the patience around having no freedom. I've no personal space. I've now got me wife here and my 2 kids. Let's talk about that.
Well, we're not in that situation. I know for me on a morning, you get up early and I wake up and I have an hour upstairs on my own. Just making the most of it, really.
Making the most of me not being around.
Yeah. I don't message you or come
I feel
looking
unloved
for you.
now, so...
I just have that hour. Sometimes it's quite early as well. Sometimes it can be like 5 till 6 o'clock on a morning. So I do have a daughter, a grown-up daughter, and a son-in-law and a grandson. And they are starting to feel this lockdown because Rob is working. He's on a busy project, so he's upstairs in his office. And my daughter Pippa works for the prison service, so her department's shut, so she's at home and looking after a 7-year-old. So they're starting to feel it now. They tend to do things like Rob will finish whatever he's doing and go out with Raf, my little grandson, and the dog for an hour and leave Pippa to just have an hour at home. She might clean, she might sit, she might do nothing. But it's just being aware of, and I have seen men out with just the kids and no wife. Just look for ways that you can just have that hour to yourself. As you know, I've been doing some online yoga classes, some of my corporate work, and it's interesting that they like the early morning classes more than the lunchtime ones because they don't have the distraction. The kids are still in bed, the husband's somewhere around in the house. So that's an hour to themselves. So as a couple, you're going to have an agreement that at some stage, one of you, during the day, both of you at separate times, can just have an hour.
Well, patience for me comes from this. We know each other well because we spend that time together. So I instinctively know when you're feeling like you need to be left alone. Plus, you pull a face.
I go, leave me alone.
You pull a face.
Stop licking my face.
I don't lick your face. I kiss your forehead. It's not licking you. We intuitively know. And the thing about this is, the reason why most people don't know this is you never spend that much time with the partner.
And also be honest, it's not hurtful. If I say to you on a morning, is it? When you say, are you awake?
I mean, look, no. I
say,
know.
yeah, but I'm
on
not
a morning,
speaking.
If I wake up, always the same thing happens. I always know because you have a way of sleeping which isn't silent. I'm not saying you snore, but you make a noise and a breathing that changes when you are awake. So I know when I get up and that breathing is that I know you're awake. But the fact I've moved about for a couple of minutes and you've not turned around and said, good morning, how are you, means you want to be left alone. And it's kind of understanding that. I think the thing with patience is we have to remember that we all like to think of ourselves as being able to cope with stuff. And sometimes we can't, because if we've never dealt with it before, how can we? No one's dealt with this before.
And I used to go to the gym 3 times a week. And I didn't want you to come with me.
No.
It was my own thing. And not because I didn't like you. It was just my own thing.
But I understand that because we've always had... I mean, we are fortuitous in some ways that we have an house that has 3 levels. You know, I can come into the basement and, you know, or the
And you
office.
could be anywhere.
And you could be anywhere. You can be upstairs. I mean, now we both work in the same office. It's different. But even now, what I've done through this, because I'm spending more time in the opposite room to you. So we've done that without really agreeing it. It's become something that's kind of just merged and happened. I think you have to allow that to happen when it comes to patients. Where are you starting to have them pinch points? What feels niggly to you? I'm pissed off because of that. That's making me angry. What's making you angry? Just the way she looks at me is making me angry. And it's about understanding that these are not normal circumstances, but again, they are going to magnify some of the challenges you might have in your relationship. So I can see something happening at the end of this where the couples will not get through this. They will, at the end of this, thinking, I've had enough of that bloke now, or I've had enough of that lady. And throw the kids into it. I think the biggest challenge with the kids these days is a lot of them are entertained using the internet. So if you've got 2 kids at home and they're on the internet all the time, streaming things from Netflix or playing on Xbox, they're using the internet, that sounds great. It's a great way to entertain them. But if you're then working from home yourself and you need the internet tends to work that way, that the more people using it, the slower it gets.
Well, that's another thing about being in a family. Every member of the family is going to have to start to be a little bit less selfish.
Right.
And that comes from being honest and saying, hang on a minute, this isn't working for me.
And again, that's going to cause some challenges. Don't try to be a saint. The one thing to recognise is there's no weakness in it. People see these things. It's funny in our society how certain things are put on a pedestal of making you feel more, I'm more resilient because I can do this. You know, I'm more resilient. Everybody cracks. Everybody at some point will. I don't care how resilient you think you are. You will crack at some point if you do not see the warning signs. And even the people with the warning signs, eventually, if you get anybody who's pushed to a point, everybody cracks. Everybody. You've just got to believe and have faith in yourself that says, actually, I can handle quite a lot of pressure. This is not as difficult as some people are making out. You know, let's be quite honest. We've been asked to stay at home.
And be safe.
And people can't seem to follow that sometimes. Or, I've been into it for a week and it's so stressful. Grow up. If you can't handle that level of, if this is the resilience you can't show, that I can't show the fact I've got to stay in the house for 2 weeks, hang on about you, and you've got nobody in your family with it. It's different if you've got sickness and people are ill. I can understand now you can be feeling that. But the majority of people have not got any symptoms. They don't know anybody with the symptoms. They've just been asked to stay in the house for 2 or 3 weeks, and they're struggling with that. So remember, patience is something that you have to recognise. What's causing me to feel a bit fed up here? What's causing me to feel annoyed? And either voice it, or like I said about the one previously about stress and worry, write it down. Write down those things that are bothering you, then see if you can do something about changing that. So for instance, on a morning, I actually like you staying in bed till 7 o'clock. Because you used to get up at 6 and I get up at 5 and I like to have an hour and a bit. So I'd be, then I'd think, I'll get into something and then I'd start doing something, whether it's some writing or doing something online. The next thing I've got to bring you a coffee up, because if I don't bring you a coffee cup, you get a little bit, where's my coffee? You know what I mean? We're pulling funny faces for now.
Come down and do my own.
No, you did this morning. So recognising the stress and recognising where your patience is tested, write that down. It's good information, because it gives you something to work on. And you're going to have a chance to test this tomorrow and the day after that, because let me tell you,
with a few more
weeks, this to come. But I think what for me started out as being a bit of a novelty. The pictures of like people doing the day when working from home, the picture of a little desk, and next to them the kid next to him on a computer or with their books out from school. I just thought, this party ain't going to last. This is going to be short-lived, because we have to remember, behind all this, we are doing this because people are dying. This is an illness that could wipe out a lot of our population if we're not careful. So this isn't fun and games. And yes, we should keep it upbeat. I'll tell you who seems to have done very well out of this from a kind of helping people perspective is Joe Wicks.
Yeah.
But you see pictures of parents with kids with Joe Wicks, but I'm thinking, hang on, after a while, kids won't be able to do that every day. So there's this massive pressure on parents. And yes, you could say, well, what do you know? You don't have young children. No, I don't. But I have had young children, and this is no different to how it is with young children at Christmas or Easter or other times. You have to remember, patience is something you develop by being more patient. and it gives you a chance to practice that. I think the kids are the ones that have struggled the most with this because they're not used to being patient. They're used to getting everything they want when they get it. They're used to a life that's very fast-paced. But to some degree, all that life was online. The majority of their life was online, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and all the stuff. All they're doing now is they've got more time to do that. So the one thing the kids have noticed, certainly my kids aren't doing, they're not going out walking. They're not going out of the house.
Ever?
I think they go to the shop, but my son, I don't believe he actually leaves his bedroom. I mean, I'm sure he must. They must go to other rooms. I'm sure he goes to the toilet and maybe he'll go to eat. But it's surprising how very quickly they've developed into this kind of routine of staying in bed a bit later, maybe. Spending more time staying up later, maybe getting up late, so they're changing the sleeping patterns about. But patience is something. Recognise those points that are making you annoyed and then look for ways to change them. It gives you a chance as well to really find out about who you're living with. Get to know your kids more and get to know your wife more or your husband more as to what makes them tick.
I'll never have this chance again.
That's why I believe we're navigating this reasonably well. Well, I think we're navigating it very well because we are used to each other. You have to become used to each other. So we talked there about loneliness, shyness, patience, and the final one, which is, you mentioned this right at the beginning. I said, don't mention, we're going to mention it now or later, and well, the later is now. There is something out there, I know, and I don't want to make this all woo-woo, but there is a term that is used called an empath. And an empath is somebody who tends to feel other people's energy. And again, what does that mean? The people that are sensitive to stuff. So the sensitive people, and this does not make them weak in any way, shape. Sue is not weak, and she's a bit of an empath. I'm an empath, I want to say. I tend to feel people's pain. So being sensitive to the energy. Let's talk about that. So you said that's what affected you earlier on. Or earlier on in the process of the coronavirus outbreak.
I think that for me it comes from not being in control. When it's something that's not in your control and it's an unpleasant thing that's happening, you feel a little bit out. I felt out of balance. I lost my work overnight and it was a shock. And it took me a few days. And looking back, I don't think I did that bad. But my yoga was not only the thing that I earned money from that gave me independence. It was my passion, as in I enjoyed it. I loved doing it. And at first I thought, well, that's it. The income's gone, the work's gone. And I was just a little bit shell-shocked, really. But I got my head around it, and I started to look at other things, which became quite exciting. And is this what we're talking about? We're talking about not listening to the news.
No, you were talking about that idea. You tended to avoid the news because you're sensitive to things that go on. So you were sensitive to the change that happened in your own life, which is what you talked about there. We also talked about how you don't like to watch news because you're sensitive to kind of that negative side of it.
Yeah, and some things I can read in the news, if it's something quite moving, it can affect me for days, and it'll keep coming into my head, and there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do about it. Something that's happened, whatever it is. And I've spent too many years listening to the news and getting really upset about things, and then it's overtaken my life and distracting me from living. So that's one of the reasons that I don't have a television, I don't watch the news, I don't read newspapers, for that reason. And anything you need to be informed about, you will find out anyway. Somebody will tell you, like you. It'll come up on the internet when you're working. Anything that's really, really important, you will find out anyway. So I think it comes from wanting the world to be a perfect, happy, wondrous place, which it's in many times and places not. So me worrying or reading about, I have a friend in India, about how people are starving there, and when this virus takes a hold, that they're already starving, so they will have no immune system, including children and everybody. There's nothing I can do about that, so getting upset about it, the only way I can avoid it is to not even read it. Because once it's in my mind, I can't let it go.
When you started talking about that, you said, I think I handled it well, as though there's some element of weakness in not being able to deal with that.
What did I say? I'm transitioning. I needed to be left alone. I needed some space and some quiet, and I needed to be left alone.
The word I've said I'm going to use through this a lot, I'm going to use it again, is it magnifies. What it does is it highlights and magnifies who you are and what your makeup is. There are a set of things in our society, and not just in the UK, everywhere, that people are judged on. And those things, I think, are sometimes bullshit, right? For instance, now, if you asked anybody to, the majority of people say, give me what somebody who's successful is, what somebody who's successful. There generally will be somewhere in that conversation the word money will be mentioned. We judge people on financial well-being. If you've got a lot of money, you're perceived to be successful. If you are somebody who is very resilient and very tough, and handles things really well, you're seen as successful. If you're extroverted, you are seen as successful. And there are other traits that we don't value. We don't value kindness as much as we should, despite people say it. The reality is be kind. It's just a throwaway term. Don't tell me to be kind, and don't say you're being kind. Kindness is something that people evidence that I don't need to be told if someone's being kind. I can see kindness. You can experience kindness. And even though you do something that on the face it might be kind, if it's done for the wrong reasons, it's not kind at all. So if you think about what you're talking about being sensitive, it's almost like you're looking at being sensitive to change, or having somebody who picks up energy and sensitivity. That's not a bad thing at all, but in our society it's perceived to be.
This this current situation has shown up some very wealthy people as not being the nicest people on the planet.
Again, that's news that's already out there. What I'm wanting to try to do with you today is to recognise that you had a difficulty transitioning, and you felt moved by the things that happened in your life. There was a lot of change happening. It was a strange thing for you to go through. The thing is, you've got through it now. What it's highlighted for me, which is almost the entire opposite of that, but I have trouble dealing with normality. I'm not good at dealing with something that's just all right. I'm not good at maintaining things. There almost feels for me that I need an element of catastrophe to feel alive. I've always recognised this, and it's really highlighted that for me. So although you're sensitive to one thing, I'm sensitive to the fact now that this is almost giving me a sense of, there's something here now. It's almost like a siege mentality we're in, and a bit of a challenge and a bit of something difficult to deal with.
Is that why you've bought massive bags of rice?
I bought a massive bag of rice because
you can hardly lift up.
We always buy a massive bag of rice. All that this did was limited my buying options. When I went to buy rice, instead of buying the 5 kilogram bag I bought, there was none left because everybody had bought them, so I had to buy a 10 kilogram bag. So if anybody said to me, you're hoarding, we eat a lot of rice anyway. I mean, we eat enough rice in this house to feed a battalion of Japanese snipers, on a weekly basis. Is that slightly racist?
I don't know.
It
wasn't meant to be.
It wasn't meant to be, but it was to highlight it. So what I've started to recognise is the traits that we have are just the traits we have. And none of them are more or less noble than others. They just are traits. And I think it's showing now that ones that make us feel good. So the way you don't play football, but anybody does listen to football, when everybody plays football, everybody wants to be the striker, the guy putting the goal in at the front. Nobody wants to be the goalkeeper, right? Because that's perceived not to be the fancy position. Everybody knows who Cristiano Ronaldo is. Even you know who Cristiano Ronaldo is.
I do.
But I'm not exactly sure if I said, De Goya, you'd know who he was. He's Manchester United's goalkeeper. So recognising your sensitivity, we all have it. We all have this sensitivity to pick energy up. But if we don't utilise that skill, it can go away from us. And because you're doing your yoga more now, you're having to connect with people on a physical level when you're doing yoga to watch what they're doing. You can feel them when they're not doing right. So you're very sensitive to change now and sensitive to picking that energy up. Some people aren't. It's not that they can't do it. It's a skill they've forgot to use. Empathy is something that in difficult times, our empathy tends to come back. That's why people are smiling more in the morning. That's why people are volunteering for the NHS. But some people are so unempathetic that they will never change. It's been so long, it's so difficult. The likes of your man who runs these, I'm not going to mention these names. We all know who in the business world has shown himself to be a bit clownish and not particularly nice. But we should remember that, because these people, we don't know the full story. I don't know any of this. I just know it's on the face of it. They're being pushed up there by the media saying these people wouldn't give any money. They laid their staff off. And as much as I would like to say, yeah, you horrible people, I have to put myself in a position where I could have been 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when I had staff. So faced with the fact that my business could have been affected by, well, it would have absolutely been affected by this. Given the choice of keeping my staff on, and depleting all the money I'd earned for all them years for my rainy day fund, and then keeping them on or letting them go and keeping that, I don't know what I would have done. It's easy for me to say I would have given it up, because I'm not in that position. So the point I'm making is, empathy and feeling energy is something that you have in abundance because you use it more. And it's not a bad thing. And I just do feel now that people would start to see that after this, can we start to see those people that do care genuinely? I don't spend as much time on LinkedIn as you, right? Because it gets on me. I don't like it. I don't like the energy on there full stop, because I pick that energy up. But I know there are people out there, business people out there, that are utilising this situation for personal gain, either from a PR perspective, look how great I am, look how much I'm doing. And I don't think some of these are genuine at all. There are a lot of people that are doing stuff that is genuinely good, but there'll be a percentage of people that are just utilising this situation.
Yeah, and they'll be just getting on with it.
Will they, though?
Yeah, the people that are genuinely helpful will be just getting on with it. They won't be telling everybody.
I mean, this is why now it's become even that there's people talking about the mental health stuff. People have got right on the mental health thing now about this is going to affect mental health. It may or may not affect your mental health. Let's get into context again. The majority of us have been asked to do something, which is stay in your house for a couple or 3 weeks. And as stressful as that might be, we have to recognise, being told all the time, this will affect your mental health, this will affect your mental health, this will affect your mental health in a negative way. That can impact you as well. So remember, you're in control of what you think and choose to do. That's the way to deal with all this mental stuff. You can control it. Can you control your loneliness? To some degree you can. Can you control your stress and worry? To some degree you can. Your patience and how you connect with energy around you can control that as well. But if we choose to say we can't control it, it makes us feel like victims. We're just a victim. But when you can control it, if it's then not giving you the output you wanted, you have to take some ownership of it. So it's what you said. What part do you play in any of this? Good and bad. We've been at this a while, but I do want to talk about one thing before we finish, which, well, is actually quite another long section, so this can go on a bit. But anyway, we have nowhere to go. And if you didn't listen to this and it's got too long, come back and listen to the second half later. Mentally is important, but physically is something I am seeing. I've got to say, I'm starting to notice it now. Some people, I think, physically need to just consider what they're doing through this outbreak. I've wrote some notes. Are you ready?
Yes.
I think you've got to be really careful not to leave this coronavirus lockdown much heavier than you were when you went into it. Because I think people are going to be eating more when they're at home. What do you think to that? Or drinking, because you mentioned that earlier. I think people are going to be eating more and drinking more than they would ordinarily have done if they weren't at home. Or some people will.
Some people will, yes.
I think quite a lot will.
Somebody said to me the other day, well, we're allowed to go and exercise once a day. I don't usually exercise at all. I'm going to find that really hard. You've got to keep an eye on what you eat. And we know, because I read a letter a couple of weeks ago. Somebody in Italy had read about how this pans out, because, Italy was our future. At first you'll do this, at first you'll do that, and then eventually you'll look forward to eating, and it'll become, planning what you're going to eat that day will become really important, and it has with us. And it's really strange because we do spend a lot of time at home, and evening meals have always been important to us. We are very health conscious. We enjoy food. I love to cook. So it's probably not a lot of difference for us, but I have noticed you ask me more like, what we're eating a little bit more than you did before. So I think it's just being aware of, are you eating and drinking more, and just nip it in the bud right at the beginning.
Well, it's a big part of our day. And if I'm honest, you used to go out and do something, and you'd go out and do a yoga class, or I'd go up to the school, or I'd go out and have a meeting, or I'd go around the corner and cook, and then on an evening you'd sit down and you'd talk about your day. But no to talk about now. So the only thing we do tend to talk about is food. And I have become aware that there is a tendency for me in these last few days to be eating a bit looser.
I have noticed that, Gareth.
Custard creams have entered the building.
There's some things that have come into the house that were banned.
They weren't banned.
Well, they didn't make their way into the house.
Not very often, but with custard creams. Say, listen, you did best part of a chocolate orange the other day.
Do you want to reframe that?
Well, I did the majority of it, but you helped me out. You were my partner in crime. I think we've got to be mindful of this now. The one thing that I've noticed, and I've been kind of experimenting with this, and that's a nice way of saying I've just been recognising what's happened because of the result of something I did. But I found that when I eat a lot of sweet stuff, like I think I had quite a lot of custard creams, and I suppose I should just explain to the listeners or the viewers on YouTube. I have this thing about food. I can go a long period of time without eating. Sue will back this up. And I can go 12 hours, 14 hours. I can go a full day without eating and it doesn't bother me. The minute I start eating, I can eat a lot. So although I'm quite a tall, slim chap, I have quite a talent at eating a gargantuan amount of food when I choose to.
Gareth's favourite question is, have you made enough? Is there enough there?
I like to feel like I've got enough food. So I've started to... So I was eating some stuff the other day, and I've noticed I had quite a lot of biscuits and things that you would tend to buy that you... And we don't like to use the term here at Better 27, the word treat, because they're not treats. You know, you're putting rubbish into your body that's going to affect you. When I've taken things in that people might class as treats, I've always felt low energy, and what they call it, the YouTube's turned off. So I just want you to keep talking about the food I've been eating, because I'm going to turn this camera on again.
Okay. So we've kind of like been more interested in keeping ourselves healthy, because it came to our attention that we were slipping things in there that probably weren't the best option. So it is easy to fall into bad habits, definitely. And the things that I love to do, which was go to the gym on a morning, go teach me yoga, no. And we do have weights here that haven't been moved for 2 weeks. We keep saying we're going to do it. So it's not easy. You know, a change is being thrust upon us all, and we have to navigate it the best way we can and come out the other side, like one of my friends said to me, not 2 stone heavier or stiff as a board.
Your food's going to affect you. It's going to affect your immune system. If you have got anything throwing about, or there's anything around like the coronavirus, you know, you have a better chance of dealing with any kind of flu, coronavirus or seasonal flu, if your immune system's up. I found that eating the bad food has not made me feel great. I haven't done it very often. It's not like been every day. But I do notice a difference. It's really, again, highlighted and magnified to me the importance of keeping your food right. You know, we have been eating or drinking these juices that Sue's been making, green juices and orange juices on the morning. Not orange juices, but kind of, there's a citrus one and then there's a green one. These are full of nutrients. You've got to get the right food into your system. Just literally do not sit there troughing away on garbage, because you will put weight on. It's going to make you feel bad physically. You're going to be sluggish. And I think that's what a lot of people are going to have done that. So don't do it. And don't live from a takeaway. You know, you've got a chance now, if you're at home, to practice maybe some new things.
You could still get takeaways.
I think takeaways are still delivering. But I think a lot of people now have got the chance to maybe look at what they're doing. Again, if what you're seeing you're eating is rubbish, you know, maybe got a chance to change it.
You can look at this time as an opportunity to turn things around.
Well, we're going to mention that after this. I just want to bring these other 2 things into you in before, because I want to sort of finish off with 3 things that we can do, practical things.
Okay.
And that may or may not be one of them. Okay. Use a chance every day to get out and use that chance to go out and exercise. I know we laughed a bit earlier saying some people it's going to be a challenge to do that. Just do it. If you can't
Just
go out,
walk.
just walk for 35 to 35, 40 minutes to 1 hour. You will cover 5k, 3 miles. This camera's gone. So listen, this will not be on YouTube. We'll not mess about with this. You will find yourself thinking about it, wanting to go out. Oh, I'm not sure. We don't know. We do this. Oh my God. Just get out. I guarantee this is something I found to be very true from somebody who's done a lot of walking and running over the last sort of 12, 18 months. If you get out, even if you don't feel great, within 5 minutes of leaving your home, you will start to feel better. And you'll start to feel the air in your lungs and you'll feel really, really good. So take the advantage to do that. And again, do it sensibly. If you are one of these people that are, where they were going, East Coast and up to Peak District, don't. You've got to exercise from your own house. If you leave your own house, and anybody can walk 3 miles from your own house, so just walk in a circle, whatever. So get that in. And the other thing I think is important, and it's the reason I'm sat here today in a pair of shoes, is don't stay in your bedclothes all day. Sue's got slippers on.
They're not slippers, they're
socks.
My feet are still cold.
Well, I would say show it to camera, but we're not on YouTube anymore now, so we'll deal with that. What do you mean good? You don't like it on YouTube, do you?
Yeah.
Well, it's another form of people like to watch YouTubes. Don't stay in your comfies all day. Get dressed. At least act like you're getting up and doing some work. Because there's something I know from my own personal experiences. The minute I put on slippers, which I do very rarely, or comfy clothing, it kind of makes you feel comfy and tired, and you start thinking, I think it's your body thinks, hang on, it's time to go to bed.
I saw a guy put a picture on LinkedIn the other day, which made me laugh. He was on a Zoom meeting and he had his shirt and tie on and jacket. Well, not a jacket, a shirt and tie. And then underneath he had his shorts and his running gear on because that's what he was doing after. But he was sat at a breakfast bar, so the upper part of his body was all smart and tidy.
You've got to get up in the morning and get dressed. Don't let yourself drift and stay in bed. I don't like this word that people have invented recently, the duvet day. It's just lazy. Get up, do something. You've no excuse. You're going to have more time. Even if you are doing the same amount of work that you would have done at your office or place of business, you've got the bit that you don't have to travel to now. So you can use it. Use it properly. Don't stay in bed all day or not brush your hair or anything like that. And then I think we've covered this off, but if you want to look at how to really improve your diet, and you might be worried about, hang on, am I getting the right nutrients? Get yourself some vitamins. You can get them online, they'll deliver them to you, even though you can't go to the shops. But I think Holland and Barrett's are open, aren't they?
They are, but it was interesting how vitamin C went off the shelves.
Well,
Big
people
style.
fret about it, didn't they? Everybody got into the panic buying thing. And one of them
You
was
can get a lot of
C,
vitamin C down here with your oranges, lemons, spinach.
which are fully available now in the shops.
Fully available.
At the moment. So these are the kind of things. Look at your physical side. Make sure you are eating properly. Don't drift into just eating garbage all day and eating too much of anything. You've got to move. I've certainly noticed I've put some weight on, and that's not put weight on because I've been eating a lot more. It's because I'm actually exercising less. Because I'm not running for 6-8 miles. I'm not going out for 2 hours. I'm going out for 40 minutes with you. And that's right to do so. I suppose I could say, well, I should go out twice a day. Then I'm not keeping to the rules. You've got to do your bit in this. We're all in this together. Also, or so they say.
Queen told us.
Queen told us, and if Queen tells you, you've got to listen, because she knows.
Yeah, she hardly says very much.
No, I feel for that Prince Philip. I hope he's all right, because he's not in the best of health anyway, is he?
No, but...
He'll be in some oxygen bubble somewhere, hopefully. We'll miss him when he's gone.
We were talking about this the other day. She's been one of the best monarchs ever in history, and she's always been there. And as long as I can remember, I mean, my mum is 76, the Queen's 20 years older than her. So she's been Queen for most of Mum's life. And there's a lot of older people that won't have known any different. No kings, just her.
Interesting times. This idea of keeping yourself physically well is something that there's a lot of talk of this, as I say at the moment. There's a lot of talk about mental health. This is a big buzzword, especially in business. There's a lot of people trying to sell stuff on mental health, and it's another thing. And it's important. As health and safety was back in the day, and as all this other stuff, it's always important. But let's put it into context as well. There's two sides to your health, mental and physical. There's no point trying to work on your mental health if you don't work on your physical side. They're both tied in. You don't need to be a gym bunny. You just need to make sure that in this time, especially now, explore some of those ways to get fit at home. You could buy some resistance bands.
We were talking about setting up an assault course in back garden.
Yeah, we should do. We could kind of go over the, what could we put out there? Barbecue. Over at barbecue, under washing line, round the wheelie bins.
We could pole vault over at washing line with that stick that you stick the washing line up with. What they're called? Clothes prop.
This is time now to end this podcast. We've got bored and we're starting to wobble on. There's 3 things I thought you can come up with, Riley, and these are, I think, practical steps. So I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to tell you what I think these are, and I want you to give some thought on them that you might, if you definitely disagree, let me know. I don't think you will. Firstly, the one thing you could really use with this coronavirus situation and the challenge you're facing is take on something that you've been putting off. Is there something you wanted to do? Do you want to read more? A hobby that's practical? Do you want to do more writing, maybe some painting? Is there something that you've been putting off because you didn't have the time that you could try to do? This is a fantastic opportunity to take and do that. You will not get this opportunity again. So what could you say at the end of coronavirus? I did this. This is what I did. I started this in coronavirus. What could it become? So looking at something you could do, what have you put off? I wanted to do a bit of writing. I've started a little bit more writing and learning.
We've done some gardening.
We have done some gardening.
Which we've been putting off for ages.
So you can do things like that. They're very practical. The other thing is pick the phone up to those people you might not have spoken to for a while. It certainly made a difference to me. I've rang 2 people who I would not ordinarily have rang. 3 people have rang me, so I owe one. So just pick up the phone to people that you might not have spoken to before.
They're always really happy to hear from you.
We're always happy to hear people ring us. We forget how important a phone call is. And even if you don't know them that well, they'll appreciate your call. And then finally, just enjoy this pace of life, because we will not get this experience again. We have had the chance to slow our life down, again in some very difficult circumstances for some, but for the majority of us, enjoy the peace. Don't try to make it go faster. Don't be wishing this away too fast. Yes, we have got to get the country back to where it wants to be. Yes, this might be affecting your business and stress. All the things we've talked about, I get all that. But even at this time, why can't you just think, hang on, I like this pace of life? Because we're going too fast as a species at times. This is a chance for us to experience what it's like to slow down. And I've got to say, I quite like it. Anything else to say, Sue?
No, I agree with the things that you said. I'm hoping that we will go back to a different world, a nicer world, a more caring world, and that we have come out the other side with some new skills and some new ways of thinking. I
like it. We'll end this podcast by giving the advice that the government give every single day. Stay inside. Protect the NHS.
Protect the NHS.
Save lives.
Save lives.
Until next podcast. Take care.
Bye-bye.